Coming up on The Cost of Living.
If you look at the residents of Truro, a large percentage work in Halifax or Dartmouth. Well, that's a 91-kilometer drive each way. And prior to the pandemic, it's just what you did.
Sometimes work is a long way away, and more people are balking at a big commute. So if you don't want to schlep into the office, could the office come to you? Hi, I'm Paul Havershoot. Welcome to The Cost of Living. Co-working was pitched as Uber for offices, sharing workspace with strangers. Just like Uber or Airbnb, it started as a big city thing. Now, it could be coming to a town near you. Also today, Nike is the Greek goddess of victory. That is an awesome name for a sports shoe. It was also trademarked more than 50 years ago. And good luck finding a good god name now. So what does the next brand do when names are harder to come by? Like a lot of companies these days, probably just invent a whole new word. Up first, Sinatra wanted to wake up in a city that never sleeps. That's New York. It does business into the wee small hours. Your town probably gets more sleep, but maybe not for long. Rick Thomas stays up late, at least on weekends. That's when he works as night manager at Singapore Sam's in Calgary. His shift starts around 11 p.m.
On a typical weekend, we're quiet for the most part up until 1:30, 2 a.m. 2 a.m., once the bars let out, then we get that big flood of clients coming in. And then it goes crazy, not steady, it goes crazy until 4 a.m. and sometimes later.
Not many places are open that late, but people are still out, they're hungry, so...
We fill up. I know, you're looking around and going, wow, that's a lot of people. Yes, it is, yeah.
So nights are jumping. As for days...
Things are not that great, as you can see right now. We have lunchtime and we don't have any customers, right? It's tough, it's really tough. But late night is crucial for us, really important. You come in here at, let's say 2:30 a.m., and this place will be full. And I'll have people waiting outside to get in.
And right now,
for a table.
It's empty.
Right now it's empty.
Life doesn't stop just because the sun goes down. So why should commerce? Around the world, more cities are starting to think about their economies in that light. Or, you could say, by the light of the moon. And they're wondering, what if we just stayed open? In Ottawa, the city is looking to hire a nightmare, like Mayor of the Night. The official title is the more bureaucratic-sounding Nighttime Commissioner, because Ottawa. The job is part of a bigger nightlife economy action plan.
Right now, there's just under 5,000 nightlife-related businesses across the city. 25% of those businesses employ between 5 to 20 employees or so. And collectively, it represents over $1 billion in wages to the local economy. So it's significant.
Emmanuel Ray works in economic development for the city of Ottawa. He says between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., visitors and residents spend about $2 billion a year. During the day, it's closer to $5.5 billion. So about a third of what gets spent in the city happens after traditional business hours. Ottawa wants that to go up. Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Hamilton, Halifax, they all want the same thing and are pushing their own nighttime economies. Montreal is at the head of that pack. It's about to pilot a 24-hour nightlife district. It's expected to open soon, in the Latin Quarter, which is close to downtown. But Will Straw says it's more than just the Montreals that like the looks of the night economy. He's a professor at McGill, where he studies the nocturnal life of cities.
There's no city in the world from Mexico City to Melbourne to I don't know where, that now doesn't want to have a nighttime policy and to present itself as in some way a nighttime city. No city now wants to say we're the quiet, sleepy city where you can go to bed at 7 o'clock and not hear any noise.
The idea that extending opening hours could boost a local economy is, in some ways, obvious. But when it really started percolating was the 1990s.
The original idea about the nighttime economy was just to get cities and towns to think about that there's economic activity at night that usually the regular mayor, what we call disparagingly sometimes the day mayor, wouldn't have noticed. And that's everything from taxis and kebab stands outside English pubs to people working all night in bakeries and in hospitals and so on.
Cities in the UK were the first to really start thinking about the night differently. They looked at all the club kids hopping cheap flights to see, like, a DJ in Ibiza and wanted to get a piece of that action. Places like London and Manchester revamped their nightlife policies. The idea of the night economy has been on a slow boil ever since, and it's evolved into something more than just bars and clubs.
It's kind of been dissolved within a broader whole set of things, everything from cities doing Nuit Blanche and other nighttime arts festivals or bicycle nights or museum nights or bookstore nights all over, for example, Latin America. But then you also, and I think this is the really key development, you have the emergence since about 2012-13 of what is called nighttime governance. Let's have an office or a person in city government who will look after the night and promote the night. So you sort of have this idea of let's have an advocate for the night within city government. And over 150 cities in the world from 12 years ago now have some version of a night mayor, a night czar, a night ambassador, and so on.
The first one of those 150 cities to appoint a night mayor? Amsterdam. There, they call it a Nachtburgermeister. Where night used to be an afterthought, even a nuisance, the Nachtburgermeister is there to remind people that the things that go bump in the night can also go cha-ching. The big picture thinking behind the night economy goes like this. A city has a bunch of assets, and half the time, many of those assets are just sitting idle. So why not use them? Think about downtown cores. A lot of them turn into ghost towns after 5 p.m. Becoming a 24-hour city would give them new life. Will Straw says in some places, the night is already bolstering other parts of the economy. In Asia, cities that are seeing fewer visitors are using the night to tap into more homegrown spending.
There, the argument is that, we need to build internal consumption. That is, we need to get the people who live in these countries spending more inside the countries because there aren't as many people perhaps coming as tourists, or we're not exporting as much. And so the biggest developments have been, the opening of night markets, of night entertainment centers in Hanoi and many, many Chinese cities. And that's strictly based on an economic argument.
Strict dollars and cents are only part of the rationale for opening up the night. Look at Ottawa. It was famously called the city that fun forgot. That is a bad look when you want university students or workers who could live anywhere to pick you.
There is a general argument that, all kinds of creativity ultimately converges and helps the economy more generally. I mean, Richard Florida, the economist, his argument 25 years ago was that just having clubs and so on attracted the young, hip workforce that you wanted if you wanted to have tech industries, even if the things they were going out to experience at night weren't necessarily themselves related to what they would do in their work during the day.
So the math is like night plus fun equals a place people want to live. That sounds good on paper, but how much the night can help an economy is hard to know. People only have so much money to spend. So boosting the night economy could just steal dollars from the day, not actually make the economy any bigger. And another consideration, the people actually working the late shift.
Being open all the time, requires a constantly renewing population of mostly immigrant, probably underpaid people to service that, and we've got to have the workforce, and that, to a certain extent, contributes to social inequality and so on.
Not that long ago, a lot of stuff just closed. If you didn't go to the bank on Friday, you wouldn't have any cash for the weekend. Now, the world is on demand. Ready or not, opening 24 hours a day is part of this bigger cultural shift. For now, most of us won't have to worry about 24-hour party people taking over. Outside of Montreal's more ambitious experiment, other places are just dipping a toe in the water, appointing a nightmare, running a few more ad hoc events like night markets. To truly become a 24-hour city would take more serious effort, like figuring out what to do about noise, and nighttime transportation, and safety. Rick Thomas has spent years working the late shift, and he can tell you, a lot of stuff goes down at night.
There are crazy things that have happened here. People walking around naked.
Naked in the restaurant.
In and out. This one lady who decided she wanted to go to the washroom. And she came in and she was completely topless. So, that happened. Things like that happen on a regular basis. Yeah, for sure.
That's not exactly a job for a nightlife commissioner. Now, if they found a phone booth and emerged as the Nachtburgermeister, well then hey, bring on the night. This is The Cost of Living, on your radio, by podcast, and on Sirius Channel 169. I'm Paul Havershrud. Lululemon sells yoga pants. Acura makes cars. What they have in common? Both names were invented out of whole cloth. These days, a lot of companies are going with names that are just entirely made up. Because as our producer Ellis Cho finds, in our interconnected world, fresh words are in high demand and short supply.
Chris White makes things that suck. His company, Fruitland Manufacturing, makes vacuum pumps in Stony Creek, Ontario. A few years ago, they invented a new product, and it needed a name.
What are we going to call it? How is it going to be perceived to our customers, to the rest of the world?
The whole company got involved. There were prizes for the best ideas, and they came up with names like
VacuStar, Thread Vac, VacuThread, because this is like, it's a screw, it's like a thread. We're trying to form a really cool word, something that was different.
After 2 weeks of brainstorming, they had it. Screwstar. But it was already taken.
Finding a name that's available, it's a freaking nightmare. And that's the challenge we're all dealing with right now.
Jeremy Miller is the author of Brand New Name and the head of Sticky Branding in Toronto.
We're experiencing a naming drought. For the first time in human history, we are running out of names, and that's why naming is so challenging.
He says a lot of words are already trademarked. They've been registered as domain names. And it's not just everyday words.
We've done the same thing through Greek and Roman mythology. We have literally trademarked all the gods and goddesses that have ever been available.
Jeremy says you can blame the internet for this. A few decades ago, you had to be sure your Pop's pizza joint was the only one in town. Now, you have to be sure you're the only popspizza.com in the world.
No one's really local anymore. In the digital economy that we all live in, once you announce your new product or your new company name, you are instantly global.
David Plassick has been in the naming business for 40 years. His company, Lexicon Branding, named BlackBerry and the Swiffer. He says these days, brand names have to translate well across the world. Getting lost in translation can mean a loss in sales.
Probably one of the more famous stories is Coca-Cola, the name Coca-Cola. It was translated just slightly off in Mandarin, and so that meant something like, eat the wax tadpole.
More than 10 years ago, the German automaker Audi named its line of electric cars e-tron. It sounds fine in German and English, but in French, e-tron sounds just like the French word for poop. David's company now has a network of language experts in more than 75 countries. They make sure businesses and products aren't named crap. And any new brand name has to follow 3 rules.
You don't want anything with any negative overtones to it. You don't want anything that is difficult to pronounce. And you don't want anything that is imitative of a competitor.
So you can expect to see more names that are made up, like Shopify and Lululemon, or spelled funny like Reddit. As for Chris White's vacuum product, it did get a name.
Workstar, WERCSTAR.
It only took 2 years. For The Cost of Living, I'm Ellis Cho.
This is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstrood. When you hear co-working, you may think about WeWork. It was going to disrupt the office. It was worth nearly $50 billion. And then it all went poof. They even made a movie about it, starring Anne Hathaway.
The future of work looks different.
We're selling an experience.
WeWork filed for bankruptcy late last year. But, Danielle Nerman, just because it's done doesn't mean co-working has gone away.
It's still around, and co-working today isn't your dad's co-working.
What do you mean my dad's? This whole thing is like 2 seconds old.
Hey, stuff moves fast. And here's the thing. What's happening now is different than a few years ago. That's when Derek Hovinga first started going to a shared office, and he's what you might think of when you think of co-working.
So he's like young, hip, drinks lattes.
Kind of, yeah. He quit his marketing job during the pandemic and started his own company from his home office. But after a while, his productivity was...
The truth? A lot of nap times. And sometimes I'm just like, I'm working and then I'm like, you know what? I could probably put like an hour aside and just start playing a video game or something like that. Or just, watch the new Queer Eye or something like that.
Every freelancer out there is just nodding their head right now, knowingly, maybe a bit sadly.
Yeah. So now, Derek, he goes to a co-working office, and it's just around the corner from his apartment in Calgary.
And he what? Rents a desk there?
Yeah. And when I visited Derek, where he works, I saw desks, but I also saw lots of people floating around with their laptops. The office has big communal tables on one end and couches on the other. So it's really relaxed. Everyone is, milling around and chatting, and that's what Derek likes.
Obviously, I'm self-employed, so there's no company culture. It's just me and my dog, Nacho. So it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off of, random people. But there's also something very inspiring about watching people working around you as well. It kind of makes you feel like, I want to work just as hard as this person.
So he's the classic, if I'm going to get anything done, I got to get out of the house.
Totally. 10, 15 years ago, too, when co-working offices started, guys like Derek, they were the target market. But Meg Felsing says that's changing. She's with Work Nicer, which has 6 co-working locations in Alberta.
I think there is a misconception that a lot of people that work here are kind of those like one-person teams, entrepreneurs, maybe like hippy-dippy,
Hippy-dippy. Shots fired at people renting spaces from her.
The point Meg is making is co-working is evolving. It's getting a lot more corporate.
We also have like huge enterprises who are trying to offer employees who are just like unmotivated and itching to get out of the house an option to go somewhere, where they can be productive.
Work Nicer has clients like TELUS and Dot-Meredith, which is the digital publisher for magazines like People and InStyle.
Well, what would a company like TELUS, which is big, it has its own buildings, want anything to do with co-working?
It's just an option for their workers. The company has a flexible workplace policy, so employees can work from home, they can come into an office, or they can do both.
Yeah, well, a lot more people working hybrid out there.
And that's why we keep hearing about companies downsizing their office space. It just doesn't make sense for them to have 5 floors if their staff isn't even coming in half the time. That's expensive.
And it's an issue for downtowns, right? There's a lot of half-empty office towers out there.
Oh, yeah. Last year, the national vacancy rate for downtown offices hit a record high, nearly 20%. In Ottawa, the feds are planning to sell 10 of their government office buildings, and companies like Shopify and TD, they've also shrunk their offices.
Yeah, well, for commercial real estate, the bloom is definitely off the rose. I mean, look at like CPP, the Canada Pension Plan. It was all in on offices not that long ago. Now it just unloaded a couple in Vancouver. It sold one in Manhattan that needed some renos and some money put into it, but it sold it for $1.
$1, yeah. Well, a lot of companies are realizing they can save by getting out of long-term leases. Co-working operates on a totally different model. Companies buy a membership for employees, and they can add or cancel those memberships really easily. They don't have to worry about cleaners or office supplies. It's all taken care of.
So they're basically just trying to outsource the office. And at the same time, what that is doing is, again, it's leaving some of these buildings empty or mostly empty. Is this where co-working comes in? Are they just moving into these spots?
In some cases, yes, but we're also seeing a lot of them crop up closer to where people live. Residential neighborhoods and suburbs, even small towns outside cities. Places like Truro, Nova Scotia.
I find this location really fascinating because this is a town of 14,000 people. And if you look at the residents of Truro, a large percentage work in Halifax or Dartmouth. Well, that's a 91-kilometer drive each way. And prior to the pandemic, it's just what you did.
Wayne Berger is the head of the Americas for IWG. It's Canada's biggest player in co-working. In the last 2 years, IWG has opened 37 new locations in places like Red Deer, Alberta, and Cambridge, Ontario. And their Truro office, it's already full of people whose jobs are based in Halifax.
And so it tells us that the commute has really become the enemy. People just do not want to commute. It's time-consuming, it's costly, and frankly, it wastes productive time, and it takes time away from families and extracurriculars and what people want to do outside of their work hours. So the commute has become a real factor in driving this growth of the third workspace.
The third workspace?
Wayne, he really thinks the future of work is going to be flexible, and it will happen in 3 spaces: the office, the home, and then somewhere else.
And that somewhere else could be a coffee shop.
Sure. But with more co-working locations opening in the suburbs and smaller markets, Wayne imagines something like a hub-and-spoke model where you have the hub, that's the corporate headquarters, and it might still be downtown, but it's smaller than it used to be. And employees, they're only going there occasionally, like for AGMs. And then there are co-working spaces. Those are the spokes.
So instead of us going to the office is coming to us.
That's the idea. And Wayne thinks everything will be done through an app. Employees will order a desk like they order takeout.
People, when they need to go to work, will just open up their app like they do their Uber app and go pick a place that makes sense for them, check in, get some great work done, and then check out and transition to the next place to continue to get work done. That's the future.
I mean, that sounds like a future. And if you're the CEO of a co-working company like he is, sure, you're going to say that sounds like a pretty good future to me. But at the same time, if you're like a traditional commercial real estate office building owner, you're thinking, I could see some different futures.
For sure. But if things do go that way, that could change the way cities look. Like if people are no longer anchored to one office and they're spread out working all over, that might ease traffic congestion and just make our lives a little easier.
So a lot of things are distributed and not so centralized. Mm-hmm. Well, if that does happen, hopefully the people going into these spots like where they're going.
Well, I mean, some of them are pretty swank. Like the place Derek goes to, it's got a bar, bottomless beer.
I mean, there's all this talk of productivity. I'm not sure that would help too much.
Well, there's also root beer on tap.
It's so good.
Can you pour me a little glass of root beer?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, wait, can I have some ice first?
Did the root beer tap sell you? You in on this co-working thing?
It didn't hurt. I could get on board.
Thanks, Danielle.
You're welcome.
Oh, no.
That was a terrible pour.
That's all for this week. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Danielle Nerman, Ellis Cho, and Jennifer Keene, with help from Caroline Ferris. Our executive producer is Tracy Johnson. I'm Paul Haversrud. Thanks for listening.